We'll be getting underway in a couple of minutes or so. Okay, it's 1 o'clock and we'll get started within a minute or so. Welcome back, Tori. Okay, thank you for attending. My name is Bruce Miller and I'm with RimTech Consulting. So the topic of today's session is why we should not allow users to participate in record keeping in a modern EDRMS project. So this webinar is not like a typical webinar. We're not here to sell you something. This is purely educational. No surveys midstream, nothing like that. So I encourage you at any point to open your mic and ask a question. And I'll definitely be leaving time at the end for anyone who wants to stick around for questions, okay? Okay, so first of all, let's get this out of the way, which is the whole goal of an EDRMS, electronic document records management system, is compliance. So what exactly do we mean by compliance? Well, it means, in my opinion, three things. Number one, every document adheres to or complies with the official retention schedule. Number two is every document is being managed as a record. Notice I never said whether or not it was a record. I actually don't care. What I care about is that the documents are being managed as records. And that in turn means three things. Number one is the document is immutable. It cannot be edited or deleted throughout its lifetime until it reaches its end of its life cycle. It means that the document has had a proper, appropriate retention rule applied to it. And the third thing is that in the case of about 60% or more of all records, the retention rule is being applied typically based on an event trigger, and those event dates have to be existing in the software somewhere so that the retention rule can be run properly. So those are the three characteristics of being managed as a record. And the final one, number three, is we can do a disposition. In my personal opinion, over 90% of or higher of all EDRMS projects on the planet today are incapable of doing a disposition. Why not? Because the records are not classified accurately to a high enough extent. I think the minimum acceptable threshold is 85%. And if you do a disposition 5 or 6 years out with millions of records that you can delete in a push of a button, you're going to need to have 100% confidence that you're doing the right thing. And that confidence can only come from measuring and proving that those millions and millions of records have the proper classification code applied to them. So that's easily done. I have other webinars and training videos on YouTube about that. I also offer training courses on how to do that. So one way or the other, we have to make our system compliant. That means in a typical modern EDRMS that you have to combine three things: your retention schedule, the record keeping software product, which is one of 5 products on the market today, and SharePoint. So you've got to make those 3 products work together effectively. So let's get right to the heart of it. Why don't we just let users decide what retention rules they would like to apply to documents? After all, they're responsible, right? So here are my reasons why we mustn't do that. Number one is they don't want to. So right off the bat, we're making them do something that they are reluctant to do. Number two is there are no consequences, at least none that I have seen around the industry. If I don't manage my records properly, I'm highly unlikely that I'm going to have any negative repercussions from that. I certainly won't lose my job over it. Number three is many people tell me, it's too much work. I've already got enough to do. Now you're adding more administrative overhead and burden on top of what my workload is now. I already feel under paid and overworked as it is. So no, I don't want to do that. This is the one I'd like you to concentrate on for today. Even if we did force them to do it, and even if they did it, it wouldn't it wouldn't work. Why not? Because they wouldn't get the classification codes accurately assigned consistently enough to hit our minimum acceptable threshold of 85%. That's the reason why, okay? I don't care about the first 3 reasons, but number 4 is really difficult to argue with, and that's what I'm going to try to convince you of today. So we have SharePoint. We have these users who want nothing to do with records management. So what do we expect them to do? Well, here's what we need them to do in an EDRMS setting. Number 1, put documents into the right places. And in the case of SharePoint, that means a library. Not hard to do. In fact, I would suggest it's almost impossible to put the document into the wrong library. Why is that? Because if you have it properly deployed, and I'm guessing many don't, but if SharePoint has been properly deployed, you have meaningful descriptive metadata, what SharePoint calls columns, on every library. So this is what it would be like. I have a document about an expense reimbursement. So there's a library called expense reimbursements. Great. What does the metadata look like? It would be things like amount, purpose of the expense, when it was submitted, who approved it, and when it was reimbursed. Now, suppose I have another library called fleet vehicle maintenance, repairing our vehicles in the fleet. What's that metadata going to look like? Well, it'll be things like work order number, vehicle number, make and model, date in, date out, technician name, work performed, that kind of thing. So now, imagine taking an expense document and putting it into the fleet vehicle maintenance library or vice versa. The metadata is such an obvious mismatch that it would practically take an act of deliberate malfeasance to put it in the wrong library. So I think that's pretty straightforward. Number 2 is we need users to put documents into the right cases. What the heck is a case? A case is a set of related records that I call an adventure, and I'll explain them in more detail in a few minutes. But the place in SharePoint, and again, only if deployed properly, is a document set. And a document set is a container of related documents. And there are many, many thousands of them, and the metadata is the same in every document set. So therefore, we can't insulate ourselves from mistakes because the metadata is the same on all the different cases. More on that in a minute, but that's where a bit of a risk lies right there. And this is the big one, which is we need users to fill in metadata, okay? Now, Most people are allergic to metadata. And I don't mean end users. I mean IT professionals are allergic to metadata. I have my reasons why, but I don't want to share. But nonetheless, um, the less metadata you have, the less the overall utility and benefit and return on investment you're going to get from SharePoint. A healthy EDRMS has an average of 14 metadata fields. Yeah, 14. But of those 14, the users typically only have to fill in about 2.1 on average. That's a healthy EDRMS. But there's a bug. There's a problem here. Fly in the ointment, if you will. SharePoint allows people to put documents into SharePoint without mandatory metadata. Yeah. I mean, really? Um, I'm not aware of any other document management product that would ever allow that, but SharePoint does. And in order to make the EDRMS work correctly, you have to have that metadata. So this is a flaw in SharePoint itself. So in this diagram here, we have the user in the middle here, and they can put a document in SharePoint up above, and they can go either in the left direction or the right direction. The left direction, I'll call it store. The right direction, I'll call it declare. In the left, they're going to take a document and they're going to just toss it in SharePoint. That's it. That's what they do today. Do they know if it's a record? No. Do they care? No. They're just throwing it in there and that's it. End of story. Job done. Is it a record? Who knows? Who cares? Doesn't matter. If we ask them to go right, then they're going to put a document into SharePoint as a record. So let's do that. Little mind experiment here. If they do, then they're going to have to tell us, is this a work in progress? Is it finished enough that we can lock it down and treat it as an immutable record? Then they're going to have to look it up in the retention schedule. So what's this document is about? Well, it's about fleet vehicle maintenance. So they load up the electronic retention schedule. They get a list of anywhere from 800 to 1,000 lists. And yes, for 1,000 users, it would be 800 minimum, a list of activities. And on page 76, sure enough, they find the one they want, which is fleet vehicle maintenance. Meanwhile, a couple of minutes has gone by. Anyway, they choose it. They're happy. Off they go. So they put the document in there. And on average, users submit 12 records per person per day. So that means they have to do this 12 times. Anyway, and this is all on top of filling out metadata, right? So now everything is fine. And the next day, they realize they made a grievous mistake on page 7 of their document. So in great haste, they go in and say, oh my God, what have I done? So they go in and they try to edit it and they can't. It's denied because the record is immutable. That's the reward they get for all that work they put in, right? So bottom line, please don't even expect that the user is going to cooperate. They're not. Now, this is the next round of me trying to convince you of this, which is how many documents per day does a user really create that are records? Well, I believe the number nowadays is closer to 12. This is an old slide, but here in this example, we have 1,000 users and just 6 records a day, which is half of a realistic number. That's 1.3 million a year. So at that pace, if you were to take 1 minute per document to examine it, look at it, fix it, correct it, reclassify it, do anything at all with it, just 1 minute, you would need 12 and a half days of work. That's for 1 single day of usage in your EDRMS. 1 single day. That's it. Okay? So it's not going to happen. Just forget about it. It's just not even feasible. There's no way that a records manager can interfere, intervene, in any way work with a volume of records of 6,000 per day. It's just not going to happen. Okay? So somehow we've got to get all of these documents, 6,000 a day, to have the correct appropriate retention schedule. Now, Here's a reality that I've noticed over the years, and I'm sure that you have an intuitive appreciation of this. If I take one document and I show it to 10 different users, and I ask them two questions, is this a record? And if so, where does it belong in the retention schedule? How many different answers am I likely to get? Well, you can get as many as 10. If it's a very cut and dry example, you might get two or three different answers. But if it's the slightest bit questionable or ambiguous, you could easily get 10. And worse again, if I were to repeat this exercise with the same document and the same people a month later, the answers will change. So how the heck are we supposed to get consistency and accuracy in this kind of an environment? The answer is we're not. Simple as that. So that leads to two schools of thought. School of thought number one is compliance comes from end users. End users have a responsibility to manage their records. And I've seen this enshrined in many corporate policies. I really have. Let's count on the users to do this. The users have a responsibility. They work here. They have an obligation to do so. So let's just have them do it. Okay? Let the users decide. Now, the second school of thought says, wait a minute, are you out of your mind? That's never going to work. We're going to ask unmotivated, untrained users who don't care about this to do this 6 or 8, 10, 12 times a day. Just not going to happen. We need to impose it on them. We need to say, this is the retention rule, like it or not, it's getting this retention rule. And you don't get a say in the matter. Which of these two schools of thought is correct? The one that says we need to impose it. Why? Because the other way just doesn't work. I have never seen it in my entire career, and I don't expect to see it at any time in the future. I see no reasons why that will ever work. Many, many, many EDRMS projects have died on the table because of that. Don't let it happen to yours. Okay? Some products, well, only one actually, Microsoft Purview, out of the box, it has this stance, which is users drive compliance, not the organization. That's wrong. It's upside down. It's inside out. It's backward. Thankfully, it's pretty easy to fix. But when you deploy Purview, you have to change its posture so that it takes the opposite posture. So that means that now let's go back to a more realistic number of 12 records per person per day. I'll show you where I got that number a little later. At 12,000, there's no way the records manager can intervene. That's just a cold, hard reality. Second, equally cold, equally hard is we can't rely on the users to do this for us. So what does that mean? It means we only have one option left, which is to automate it. And we must automate it. And that automation is done in either one of these 5 software products with two things. Content rules, which say, for this content, apply this retention rule, and with supporting libraries and metadata so that it can make the right choices as to which retention rule to apply to which content. So that leads us to this classification accuracy rate, what I call the CAR, C-A-R, which to me is the ultimate test of whether your EDRMS will be successful or not. It says that we need to maintain 85% accuracy or higher in order to proceed with the disposition. And disposition is why we're here, right? So if you cannot do a disposition because you don't have the confidence in the accuracy of the classification, you can't do a disposition, and you can't fix it because the volume is too high. You need between 12 and 20 days of work every day to make this problem go away. That's not going to happen. So it's not a fixable problem. I call it poisoning the well. If you drop below that 85%, there's no hope of fixing it. So here's an example of someone who received 6,000 records a day, but the classification error rate was 50%, meaning 3,000 of those a day were wrong, okay? And at that pace, you end up with 15,000 mistakes by Friday, And to fix those mistakes would require 13 full-time employees. That's just not going to happen. And that's just for 1 week. And it's only for 6,000 records a day, which I believe is only half of what you're going to get for 1,000 users in the real world. So in the EDRMS, you have to build out SharePoint so that it's compliant. And that means you're going to have, for typically 1,000 users, about 800 categories or business activities in the retention schedule. Of those, 60% or higher typically will be case categories. Case categories means an event-driven or an event-triggered retention rule, such as audit end plus 5 years then destroy, or employee termination plus 6 years then destroy, something like that. So of our 800 in the retention schedule here, 480 are on the right, which are subdivided into cases, whereas the 320 remaining on the left are not. You'll notice the retention rules are shown as little tags here, are applied to the cases on the right, but to the individual documents on the left. So this translates to 800 libraries in SharePoint, but up top, we have our record software where we're typing in content rules. And content rules are what makes these projects work. Content rules assign appropriate retention rules to each one of these libraries, or more specifically to the content in the libraries. So this is what too many records managers miss, which is we think that once we get the retention schedule and its rules into the software, we're done. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is what too many people miss, which is the retention rules do nothing for you. Nothing. You have to apply them to content in SharePoint. No matter which of the 5 software products you buy, shown down below, there are 5 of them, you have to create these content rules, which says basically for this location in SharePoint and meeting this criteria in the metadata, so we know which documents we're referring to, apply this retention rule. So here we have 2 content rules as a great example here. Library equals audits and final report equals yes. Then apply the retention rule called audits final report, which is audit end date plus 10 years and destroy. But what if the final report is no, i.e. the rest of the documents? Then we'll apply the rule 5 destroy. So in a healthy EDRMS, it turns out that we typically get about 3 content rules per library or per category in the retention schedule. That's 2,400. If we have 800, 2,400 rules. Yes, no EDRMS on the planet will do a thing for you until you create those content rules. That's what I call the beating heart of an EDRMS. You can see down below, different vendors have different names for those rules. For example, Opus calls them business rules, and Purview calls them auto-apply policies. And your retention schedule, every activity has to have, whether it's a case or not, entered explicitly for it. In fact, right inside your retention schedule, and obviously we're not going to go into any detail today, but I have training courses and videos on YouTube explaining this. The retention schedule has to contain the content rules because that's the instruction on how you're going to destroy the records. Here's a few examples. This is Collabware, and you can see here they have SharePoint column if it contains department, and the operator is equal to administration. So if department equals administration, apply a retention rule to it. This is Gimmal. On the left, these are SharePoint properties, columns again. So if this column equals this value, then apply a retention rule to it. And they can even join multiple lines here. This is Opus. And it says, once again, apply term by. What does that mean? Well, that means apply retention rule. That's what they call a term to any document that meets the criteria between the if and the then. So here's the criteria. If this, then apply the following term, which you pick from a list of your retention rules. So you can see the same pattern again. Column approved equals yes, or approved by matches the name Smith. You can string together as many conditions as you want, but this content rule will apply this retention rule to those records that meet those criteria in the condition. Here's Microsoft Purview. They call their content rules auto apply policies. Apply label, which is their name for a retention rule, to content that contains properties. So here's an example down below. Refinable string 45 equals audits, and refinable string 0 equals reports. What the heck is that? That's their way of saying library equals audits and document type equals reports. Same thing. Content rule is a content rule is a content rule. Now, what I'm leading you to is the dependency upon metadata, okay? Obviously, these content rules cannot work without meaningful metadata, right? And there's one extra step here, which is document sets. In a healthy, properly deployed EDRMS, and I'm not saying they all are healthy or working properly, but if they are, each case, which is an adventure, a business adventure which is repeated periodically, um, and each adventure we call a case or a set of related records, is a document set in SharePoint. So here we have an actual system which has an activity called competitive procurement. And each procurement is an adventure with related records, right? So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 adventures or cases. And the user has to choose from one of these adventures and say, I have a document that's about competitive procurement. Which procurement or which employee or which project is it about, right? And this is the way you would choose which case to select. Now, mathematically, that leads to this. Suppose we have 1,000 contracts, which isn't that unusual in a large company, and you're going to put a document in SharePoint about a contract. Then mathematically, we have no choice but to force the user to tell us which contract are you talking about. How do we force them to tell us? With a drop-down list or a pop-up or a flyout or some mechanism. Doesn't matter what the mechanism is, but we have to know because we can't expect the user to say, here's a document about a contract, but I'm not going to tell you which contract it's about. It's a big secret. That just makes no sense. The mechanism in a healthy EDRMS is shown right here. Document sets. It doesn't have to be. It could be a pop down, pop up, I should say, drop down, what have you. But there's no mistaking the fact that if we have 1,000 contracts, the user must be forced to choose which contract is this related to, okay? It has to end up as a column, a metadata column, one way or the other. There's no way around this. So here's another example where we have a retention schedule with 253 categories in it. 250 are admin categories, and it has only 3 case categories: contracts, employees, and projects. But there are 1,000 contracts, 1,000 employees, and 1,000 projects. So we have to separate the records by case. That means they have to go into a different place in SharePoint. So remember, case categories like contracts, employees, and projects are broken into cases, adventures of related records. Admin categories are not. So if I have a 12,000, if I have 1,000 users at, let's say, 12 records a day per person, which would be normal, that means I have a flow rate of 12,000 records coming at me every single day. Every single day, 12,000. Where are they going to go in SharePoint? Good question. Well, here's the answer. If they're admin categories, if the records are heading towards an admin category, there are 250 places in SharePoint to put them. But if they're about a contract, an employee, or a project, then there are 3,000 places to put them. 3,000. for a total of 3,250 potential target locations in SharePoint. Okay. Now, we haven't talked about fleets, which could have hundreds of vehicles, or business units, or assets, or audits, or anything like that. Just three: contracts, employees, and projects. So if you think about it mathematically, a typical, normal, healthy EDRMS will have many thousands of places in SharePoint to put things. And that's appropriate because each case is independent from the other case and has to have a date, a unique ending date to trigger the retention. Okay, so pretty big numbers. So this is what you really got to worry about, and this is one of the biggest hazards that I've seen in an EDRMS, which is missing mandatory metadata. So if the user puts in these 6 documents shown here, the category, the company, the subcategory were mandatory. You have to fill those in, but they don't have to fill them in. Yeah. So you put it in SharePoint and walk away and ignore that metadata. That's terrible, but it's a reality of SharePoint. So um, if you have content rules that depend on that metadata, you're no longer compliant because the rule breaks, right? It can't be done. So what can we do about this? Well, there's only 2 options. You have to monitor it, and, well, you can't do anything about it really. You can only monitor it and get after the users. But there are 2 ways forward to do it. One is to use Power BI. That's the report design feature of SharePoint. And you can build a report or an active dashboard to say, to identify which documents are missing any mandatory metadata, what department, what user, date, time, subject, what have you. And then you can get after the users. We tried that and we found it very challenging to do it in Power BI. So we took a different route, which is a custom query. We did programming and it was quite easy to do. So one way or the other, you have to identify the problematic documents, and you'll see a red tag on every one that is missing data and a yellow marking. But I mean, users could go day after day after day, week after week after week, month after month, and ignoring all the metadata. You can't let that happen because that'll affect your compliance. So what we did is we went ahead and wrote a toolkit we called the Catalyst Deployment Toolkit that helps us deploy SharePoint. And one of the tools in the toolkit we call the auditor, and the auditor identifies all documents that are missing mandatory metadata and who put it in, what date, and what it's about. So you can find out who you have to get after to try to get them to fix this. And you have to be right on top of that problem because if you let it go day after day, and you could approach a person and say, you have to fix 600 documents. Like that's going to happen? No, it's not going to happen, right? So don't let it go. You have to notify users, do something to motivate them to fix it as soon as possible. So I'm going to wrap up here and say that we cannot allow users to manage their records. It's not even feasible. Why not? Number one is the business of expecting users to be records managers has not worked and will not work. Let's learn from the past, shall we? Number two is even if we force them to, or they voluntarily do it, if they do it, you'll never hit your 85% classification accuracy rate. So it's not going to happen. And the main risk is missing mandatory metadata. So I think that's what's going to have to take your focus. You're going to have to spend a fair bit of resource, time, and energy avoiding that problem. And that is it. Are there any questions? I'm going to stick around a while. As long as there are questions, I'll be here. One question came in. Do you have tips for systems that can't control the mandatory metadata, like in place, such as OneDrive? Yeah, that's true. You can't control the mandatory metadata in a place like OneDrive. You can't control the metadata at all, really. So, do I have tips for that? Not that I can think of. Um, I'm largely focused on managing content in SharePoint here, but getting it out of OneDrive and into SharePoint would be my solution. But I find that if you're going to manage what's in OneDrive, it isn't really records management, it's retention management, which in all fairness to Microsoft, they have. You can use very blunt instruments like a retention policy that says everything in this OneDrive account will be kept for 5 years and destroyed. You can do that, but that's not records management because it's not adhering to the retention schedule. There's no review process. Nothing is being, well, it is being made immutable, but it's not really full, true, genuine records management. So to me, use blunt instruments outside SharePoint and inside SharePoint. You have the full control. That's where you administer your full record keeping. Feel free to speak up with any other questions. We have many YouTube videos. I put 2 a week up on YouTube on various topics, and that pace is only picking up now. So I encourage you to go to our YouTube channel, and especially if you're serious about a project, consider taking some training because that's where you really dig into the nuts and bolts and get the job done. But I don't want to see any more projects where we deploy the software thinking that it's going to work, and then 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, when you go to do a disposition, you're stuck. You can't do it because you do a quick sample of the classification accuracy, and you find out, oh my gosh, we're down at 60%. There's no way I can do a disposition, and there's no way I can fix it. So I'm done. I'm cooked, right? And yes, it is possible to measure your classification accuracy. I have a YouTube video on it. It's called something like how to measure and prove compliance. That's where you'll learn how to measure it. It sounds impossible to measure because at 12,000 a day, that would be 25 days of work at 1 minute each to test them. But we have a way. We have a way to do it. What would you say if records were copied from another system and dropped into SharePoint? How do you push down policies in SharePoint? Would it work? Well, that's an intriguing question. Uh, if it comes from another system, to me, the origin does not matter. It could come from a file share, from a different platform other than SharePoint, or it could come from a wild SharePoint deployment, as if we haven't seen that before, right? The target EDRMS system has structured metadata and content rules that act on that metadata. So one way or the other, as long as the document makes it into the right library, it's going to get the right retention treatment. Okay, period. Now, what do you have in your source system? You might have some metadata. If you do, then you have to translate it to equivalent columns in SharePoint. That can be tricky, but it can be done. Every time you migrate, mass migrate documents, you have to do that with tools such as ShareGate. There's a few out there. I forget the names of the others right now, but there's a bunch of them. And the key is the create date. 40% of all records are triggered by age. The software measures age this way. It takes today's date, subtracts the document's date, and then the difference is the age of the document. Then it compares the age to the retention period. If it's younger, it's kept. If it's older, it's tagged for disposition. So because you're moving into a product called SharePoint, SharePoint has another flaw. It's if you have a document, for example, that is a PDF, you download it from a website, and it says on the front cover clearly January 1st, 2010. That's a 16-year-old document, right? But you put it into SharePoint, and SharePoint thinks it's a 1-day-old document because it uses the create date for its calculations. I shouldn't say it. I should say Purview, if you're using Purview, uh, uh, calculates on the create date, which is a lie. It's not the create date, it's the date it was loaded into SharePoint. So those calculations are incorrect. Now we have yet another video and training on that as well, how to deal with that. But that's a problem particularly acute with Purview in particular, because Purview doesn't allow you to trigger on any other date, okay, and other than the create date. So that's a real challenge there when you're migrating documents over. Products like ShareGate, they allow you to modify the create date, which is perfect because now you can set the create date back in time to the actual document date, which is fantastic. If you ever buy records, or sorry, if you ever buy migration software, make sure you buy software that has that feature for sure. Okay, really important in a migration. Boy, that was a long answer, but I hope it did the trick. Are there any other questions? No, it looks like we're good to go. So again, keep an eye out for our videos and our training in particular. Um, we we believe we have top-notch training, all real stuff from real projects. We don't sell any of the products we talk about. All right, great guys. Thanks very much for attending. Thanks for taking time out of your day. And tomorrow, please expect an email with a link to the recording. I encourage you to share it. Thank you very much, everybody.